All right, well, let's get started now that I think we have everything situated. I think you were all here last time Cody was here. So if you don't remember Cody, Cody is our representative for Standard Process. And so rather than listen to me talk every time for Lunch and Learns, we brought him to talk about supplements and stress and inflammation, which is extremely important always, but especially right now, obviously with COVID and flu season and making yourself the healthiest that you can be. So we will let Cody take it away.
I recognize some familiar faces, and I think Joan has good audio here. Everything should be good. Okay. So as you're starting to enjoy your meals, I know I was hearing some stress conversation talk about. So that's obviously a topic of conversation. Stress, inflammation, they are so synergistically related as well. And we'll also talk about immune system. They're all pretty much roped into that one, trifecta of chaos. And just to kind of show of hands, I know some of you are still eating, but how many have spoken about COVID within the past week, right? Had COVID conversations, just some way, shape, and form, right? Almost everybody. And how many of you have a smartphone? Hands up. And how many of you have seen Social Dilemma on Netflix?
Heard of it.
Nobody? So if you have Netflix, yeah, I like this miserable connection with subscriptions. I don't want to subscribe to anything, but I'm like forced into it. I'm like, they keep on increasing prices too. But if you get a chance, watch it. It is stressful in nature, but again, it's very interesting because the phones that we hold, right, they have so much data and so much accessibility to the world. And they came into existence only about 10 years ago, right? 2010 or so. And our brains couldn't have possibly developed that quickly to handle all that content and all that data. So let alone just our phones, it could be relationship stress, money stress. I mean, that's why stress is the huge topic of conversation for everybody. And I remember my mom always saying to me, oh, you didn't do that well on a test? Oh, you're stressed. Or you're not feeling good? It's probably just stress. And no matter how old you are, and I don't think it ever gets any better, right? It's not like your life magically turns to this non-stressful time period, especially when you mix kids into there or different work and pretty much almost anything. But this slide should be no surprise. I mean, 75% of Americans, and that's just America. I mean, that's experiencing one sort of stressful moment per time or per month, which I think is almost every day. I think every day we're under some sort of stress. Now, whether that's good or bad is kind of the topic of conversation. Good stress, I think, is common sense. It's like if you're looking for a new job and you're trying to build your skills, or if you're studying for a test. But the bad stress, and pretty much where you get into that fatigue state or that exhausted state, is when you have maybe 5 out of the 7 days that are just constant beating you up. And then maybe 2 of those days you'll have a good day. Well, now you're at a deficit. It's like a sleep deficit. And then your body starts to react. It starts to break down and health complications start to occur. And that also leads into that chronic inflammatory state as well. I couldn't remember last time if we talked about that, but I think 1 out of every 3 people in the world has some sort of chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation can lead to a plethora of issues, and not even just joints, but even diabetes, heart problems. The list is massive.
Heart disease is huge.
It's massive. And again, we have some sort of control with that, but some we don't. And that's just like stress. We can't control everything that we're doing. And we also can't control where we're working and what we're around. And I talked about drinking a second ago. I'm a whiskey fan, and I do like beer, but gluten doesn't like me. I'm reactive to it, unfortunately. So I found myself getting into more of the darker liquids or the devil's juice. And that's not necessarily a bad thing within moderation. I mean, drugs maybe are a little bit iffy. I mean, but if you have a prescription, right? I mean, without getting into that conversation, we can determine on what emotional stress we're feeling. If you quit your job and leave your loved one and just live like a hermit or a nomad, you could be a little less stressed. I remember just watching this YouTube video of this guy who lives in Norway, and he lives by himself, and he talks about how the world's ending. And he always pops up on my feed, and I'm like, oh, he's probably the most least stressed individual, but he has all this technology around him. So technically he has, 50,000 pieces of content happening per day. He's probably pretty stressed. So even living in the middle of nowhere, his cell phone is still his piece of I would say, turmoil. So it really is hard to kind of get away from that. But even by switching up diet, taking different nutritions, that is one of the steps you can kind of focus on. But whether you're driving in a car, working in a factory, we're exposed to different sights, smells, and things that we really can't avoid. Now let's kind of break down some of the phases. So we have the alarm phase, the resistance phase, and exhaustion phase. Common sense, exhaustion, your body is pretty much past that level of being able to deal. You have maybe a breakdown, your body starts to react, maybe your immune system takes a beating because the body's under constant stress, constant inflammation. And then again, the resistance phase, right? Continued stress. Maybe 5 out of those 7 days are constant, just beating you up, and you're not getting a time to recover. So when we talk about the alarm phase, which is brand new, or not brand new, but the first thing that we're focused on is this is the fight or flight. This is like when somebody challenges you or tells you no, right? Your heart rate starts to go up, you get into a conflict. If you've been in a physical fight before, you know, that's the instinct, like boom, 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 boom. You're not hungry anymore. You're just looking to, or you're taking a test, or you're doing something new in a job that you're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times where I was working on some sort of project and I'm like, what's going on? And this is before YouTube, right? I couldn't search like how to do something on a vehicle on YouTube. I looked at the Haynes manual. I'm going through it and I'm like, this picture's horrible. It's black and white, it's blurry. And now people YouTube everything. So again, kind of a double-edged sword. But the fight or flight, that adrenaline, which is that epinephrine, that kicks in and releases cortisol. And that's how we can start to combat stress at a very acute level. Next phase, resistance. The body will start to figure things out. And kind of the new normal. It's like you probably have heard people talk about COVID. It's the new normal. You know, we're this, it's the new normal. Same thing here. Our bodies are going to start to figure things out. And at this phase, you start to see lethargy. Your immune system starts to take a beating, starts to reduce its ability to fight off infections and possibly weight gain. And last but not least, the exhaustion phase. This is the phase that I think most people kind of sit in. We're looking for more caffeine. We go to our local, I'm not sure if GNC is around here anymore, but I always poke on GNC because I used to work there for about 10 years. And people would come in and would say, I'm looking for energy. And I'm kind of one of the more, I'll say kind of humbly honest ones where I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to just give you a $60 caffeine pill I'm going to make $5 off of. I want to figure out things from more of a long-term level. Most people didn't want to hear that though. They just wanted to hear, well, what can I do right now? I have to do this right now. Caffeine, Monster energy drinks. I used to live off Monster and BFCs. I love them. But they started giving me anxiety and panic attacks as I started getting older, which was just kind of insane, but it makes sense. The body was changing. Now I drink coffee. And next question is, well, how much coffee is too much coffee? Well, upper threshold could be about 400 to 500 milligrams of caffeine. That would be okay for some people, but some people, you have one drink of coffee and you just, right, can't focus. But caffeine's not necessarily the secret. And more caffeine doesn't really fuel the system. We're looking to start to either adjust or do things maybe, I don't want to say naturally, but just at more of a base level. Nutrition. Other nutrients may be resetting some of the CNS, central nervous system, and not really just focusing on a boost of energy that is one and done. So there's no secret really with caffeine. Caffeine is beneficial, but it's not going to really solve a lot of the problems. This slide just kind of shows a little bit more of the sciencey aspect, but this feedback loop just shows how powerful the brain is. There's stimulation, cortisol is released, and then all of a sudden the immune system's affected. And without getting too much into COVID, it kind of, makes sense. Like we're sitting at home, gaining weight. We're stressed because we're looking at our phone. We're reading about the elections. We're reading about COVID, and you really can't get away from it. The immune system will ultimately take a beating, and then your body will start to develop. So you're all working. You're all out and about. I know there are a lot of Americans who are terrified to go places. Well, their immune system is going to be challenged eventually. And if they're out into the world, what's going to happen then? So stress affects everything, and inflammation affects everything. That's why they're so related. Now, in terms of nutrition and in terms of things you can do that has clinical data, B vitamins do. They impact mood. Most of you have heard probably a B complex. And does anybody take a B complex here? Show of hands. What do you take, my friend?
Vitamin water, sodium vitamin water, B12, B6.
Okay.
I do that every day,
Awesome.
twice a day, or two bottles of shit.
Okay. And that's the
And that's where I
sodium.
get my energy.
That's the
from.
sodium,
I
yeah.
don't do coffee.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people also look to straight vitamin B12. And interestingly enough, I used to know people who injected vitamin B12. And someone's like, wait, you can inject a vitamin? Of course. You know, and it's like a red liquid. And back in my competitive years and in one particular activity, the guys were always saying it was like the blood of Arnold for bodybuilding because it was colored liquid. And I was involved in powerlifting field for a long distance of time at a much larger body weight. So I was exposed to a lot of different types of people. And I never thought of actually taking B vitamins in from an injection. So that was very crazy to think about. But a B complex in general, not just B12 from the holistic value, serves a lot of purpose. And if we just solo out one B vitamin, it's kind of like soloing out one ingredient of fish, or like let's say we talk about salmon. If you just say salmon's good for fat, well, it's also good for protein, or let alone peanuts. People think about peanut butter as a protein source. I think about it as a fat source. I think it's more fatty than protein based.
Source of niacin.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that are happening with just ingredients. So I don't like to typically solo out just one thing, but having the blend, I think, is the most synergistic. Now, if we do pick out an herb, herbs are typically combined with things, but also can act as solo workhorses. And ashwagandha is one of them. Tons of clinical data. And one study, and I have a couple other ones, but I can't connect to the internet for some reason. So this one we'll have to do. But the double-blind placebo-controlled study of 50 people showed that this 600 milligram extract worked. So by just consuming one specific ingredient, it reduced stress, cortisol, helped it control inflammation, and body weight. And that's pretty miraculous. So if you let that sink in for a second, without any change, they were just consuming a nutrient. And it showed efficacy. So the power of nutrition is real. And like we talked about earlier with gout, I spent a lot of time in the general clinic setting, but also ENT or ear, nose, and throat. And I can't tell you how many times I've listened to patients talk about whatever was happening. And the doctor, their job is just to prescribe or, fix the symptom, but didn't figure out the systemic source. And if they would just have asked a few more questions or maybe have a little more open-mindedness, if that's the word I want to use, they wouldn't necessarily need prescriptions. They could maybe use something like turmeric or use something like tart cherry to figure things out first. And again, I'm not saying prescriptions are bad at all. It's just, there are things that can help you, at least from a safer, but also a very effective route. And that's what ashwagandha will do, at least as regards to stress. And if you ever want to double check anything as well and just look for yourself for supplements or data, PubMed, PubMed. That website should sound familiar to some people who are science nerds, and I'm one of them. And it has tons of clinical data. Or Google Scholar, just type in turmeric, type in ashwagandha, or withania is like the herbal name. If you want to be real technical. Tons of data. So getting to product discussion a little bit, I always point out that our products are very unique because they have fancy names. And you look at them and say, well, I don't know what the hell this is. And I'm not actually sure why they've done a lot of the names that they're calling, like Catalin, for example, until I started working for Standard Process, because I've been part of this field for, I think, about 12 or 13 years now. Never understood why they called the names that they did. Drenamine is actually kind of based off adrenals. So adrenal fatigue, stress, that kind of makes sense. Catalin, which is one of our like multivitamin-esque components. Dr. Royal Lee, who's our founder, thought that we should include everything in Catalin to support the system and not just give you massive dosages of nutrients that are just either synthetic or going to cause just an acute response or just a quick fix. It was all about kind of resetting the system. But Catalin means catalyst. It's a catalyst for the system, like a spark plug. So catalyst is like starting things up and speeding up the body a little bit. So the names actually were somewhat intuitive when you really start to break them down. And adrenals are one of the glands of focus for energy and stress. Whenever I talk to people about stress, they're like, oh, I have adrenal fatigue. I'm like, how do you know that? Well, I do. I'm like, well, how do you know that? I just don't feel good. I'm like, well, there's tons of factors, right? And like my days at GNC, I would always ask tons of questions and people get frustrated with me. I'm like, what'd you eat today? Do you work out? Do you drink or smoke? Well, I do. Well, how many? I want to know all these questions or all these answers, because that right there is the start to some, snowball effect of stress and negativity. And even if you take Drenamine or eat great quality foods, if you're smoking a pack a day and drinking, a handle a week, it might not be the best thing for you. Maybe you look to adjust and maybe drink a half a bottle of whiskey. There's steps to this. And I remember working with a client in my prior life. He was eating 3 Big Macs a day and about a liter of soda, and then just the very American, like Wisconsin fish fry Friday diet. Not picking on you guys if you like fish fry Fridays, but it's not good for you. It tastes good. But he ate a huge amount. And I was even eating a large amount at that time too. I was cheating a little bit, but it was way too much for him. So I just said, let's just cut it down to like a Big Mac a day. And you're thinking to yourself, that's just insane. That's 540 calories, right? But he was consuming a huge amount of nutrients and a huge amount of, I don't want to call it poison, but in essence, not great foods for you, including sugar. We tried to cut sugar out. We went to diet soda, right? There's always those steps you can go towards. Well, then as you're starting to take supplements, because he was a prime candidate, he was taking things for inflammation, like turmeric and omega-3s. They're magical, but he was already in a massively inflamed state. So no matter what you consumed, whether it was from standard process or not, it wouldn't really matter because he was already causing so much turmoil in the body. So Drenamine is an adrenal supporting supplement, but also has a lot of things: B complex, vitamin C, and also has some of our PMG extracts, which again, standard process is known as a meat company or a tissue company. And interestingly enough, your adrenal glands actually have a huge amount of vitamin C, and they house the highest concentration of vitamin C in the body. So our founder mixed these ingredients with high quality fruits and veggies, but with also animal tissues that we don't eat anymore. And again, if you remember, I come from a hunting family. I haven't hunted that much in the past year or two, but we used to eat almost everything. We used to harvest all of our nutrients and we would add it all to stews and stocks. We don't do that anymore. How many of you hunt, just out of curiosity? Do you use the heart, liver, and kidney? Rare commodity, really is. And liver doesn't taste good that many people. And we lost that taste for liver. It's like, and when I was younger, that's what we used to eat. And my generation hasn't really eaten liver and onions, but I did. That was like my generation. And I see some people shaking their heads like, yep, I know. But not anymore. Like you can't go to your local like steak shop and be like, all right, I'm sorry, your local steakhouse. And I'm not sure if you would go to Kurt's or Palmer's, and they probably don't have liver and onions on their menu. So that's kind of the interesting thing about standard process, that we still use these ingredients because we know there's some benefits to them. And we know that especially with the gluten-free, which I unfortunately am as well, but also vegan movements, people are losing a lot of nutrients that they're used to consuming. So next topic conversation will be a B complex. And this is your whole food B complex. We do have some extra vitamin minerals in there as well, but it gives you one step of the B complex. Cataplex G as in Gary, which is not in our slide deck here today, is the other half of the B complex. So if you want the whole standard process B complex, it's Cataplex B, which makes sense, right? B, and then Cataplex G. And that would be your entirety of the B complex. So dosing can be all over the board. Drenamine could have been 3 to 9 a day. Most people take 6. This is also upwards of 6 to even like 24 a day. I've heard people popping a huge amount. And remember, these are like old school doctors will literally have you chew them. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I started chewing a lot of the things that I take in now too. I don't know why, I just kind of bought into that mindset. And the old school mindset is that when you start to chew it, your salivary enzymes start to break things down immediately. I'm like, well, kind of makes a little sense. But I think in the long run, it isn't a huge deal, but it does kind of bring some magic to the supplement world. Now, last but not least is ashwagandha complex. So we have a new product in, and this was actually before or after the slide deck was created. I'll talk about both. So ashwagandha, as we quickly overviewed, has clinical data on it, and there's a huge amount, a lot more than I actually was able to fit on the slideshow today. But ashwagandha complex is not just ashwagandha. And interestingly enough, there's actually only about 90 milligrams of ashwagandha in that product, which I think it's more of a marketing thing they did for, which makes sense. People know about ashwagandha.
I take that every night. Works very well.
It's a widely talked about herb. So besides turmeric, ashwagandha has the second most like person consumer recognition of most of the herbs that we talk about. But ashwagandha
Is it a root?
I guess you could say that. So they use different types. Sometimes they use the stalk, sometimes they use the root. It just depends on, I guess, what company and I guess who the person is. Now, in each ashwagandha product, there's different kinds and different places you can buy it from. And one of the standards is testing the amount of active constituents, which is when you talk about turmeric, you talk about curcuminoids. You talk about ashwagandha or withania, you talk about withanolides. By measuring the active constituents, you start to find out, oh, there's a difference in quality. And I always use meat as a good example. If we use prime meat versus US1 prison meat, or even select or choice, there's a significant difference in taste. Or let's say that you are a car person. No matter if you're a Ford, Chevy, or Toyota fan, Ferrari and Lamborghini are still the gold standards. They might not last that long. They're not very dependable, but you have different levels of, I would say, quality and craftsmanship. Supplements are exactly the same. MediHerb, as a friendly reminder, goes through a cold 7-day like cold drip method. That's very unique. And we don't use harsh solvents. So only water and alcohol. Whereas a lot of companies will use methanol as a quick extraction method. And the one thing I learned very quickly when I went through organic chemistry on my way to pursue pretty much where I'm in right now, I used to cheat the chemistry lab a little bit. And we used to have to extract all these like liquids and tinctures. And I used to force feed the liquid through the vials to get the result as quickly as possible. What turned out though was the yield was very small. I didn't get a lot. I cheated. Well, I'm not saying that companies do it, but they do. And if you don't cheat and you just let things naturally go through with gravity, that's what you're getting with MediHerb, is a 7-day cold dripped herbal extract, which is why we have such high active constituent levels. And I don't know if I didn't actually take a look at this one because this one just got printed, but they had a comparison chart. No, it's in a different one, but there's a comparison chart of ashwagandha, and they overviewed like 15 different ashwagandhas on the market. And we had the highest amount of withanolides. So in terms of clinical data and clinical referencing, it works. And 1 to 3 tablets of ashwagandha forte gives you your clinical dose of ashwagandha. Ashwagandha complex, on the other hand, gives you a lot less. So this is more of like your long-term supply. But if you're looking to really start to impact stress, ashwagandha forte is where my money's at right now. And a lot of docs have been using it the same way. They would recommend or prescribe 1 to 3 of those a day for like a month or 2. And then boom, switch it over to ashwagandha complex should they want. Now, I think that's the end of that. So I'll kind of break into something a little bit different. And I have a little handout as well. This is interesting. But for inflammation and stress, like I said, they're very closely related. Omega-3s are pretty much the gold standard, along with turmeric, to start reducing inflammation mixed in with stress. If you don't know why you need an omega-3, I included a little brochure, which I couldn't find in my car, so I just printed them out. But you can test your omega-3 levels, and that will give you 4 major parameters. They'll give you your omega-3 level, and this is all red blood cell tests too. So it's very similar to hemoglobin A1Cs. I'm not going to ask anybody if they're diabetic, but when you test your blood sugar, you know, your A1C will show you across the board, like monthly or weekly blood sugar spikes. We kind of did the same thing with this technology. So that way, you know really what you're at. The second thing it shows you is your omega-6 to your omega-3 balance. And that's very important because if you have too many omega-6s to omega-3s, that's massive inflammation. We should be around like 3 or 4 omega-6s to 1 omega-3, plus or minus. Most Americans are 20 to 1. So where you get omega-6s from, Fish Fry Friday, deep fried anything, even nuts, seeds, and oils that are highly processed, and even just carbohydrates that have a lot of extra omega-6s added to them as well. And almost everything we eat, carbohydrate-based, fat-based, has some omega-6s to it. Well, if you have too many, your body's under a constant level of inflammation and stress. The third thing it tests is your body's ability to convert omega-3s in the body naturally. And if you are out of whack on that, your body's not doing a good job, and you have to consume more omega-3s or reduce your intake of inflammatory foods. And last but not least, it shows trans fat. That way you know what your diet looks like. Most of us don't really have a huge amount of trans fats in our diet, but if you're eating like a lot of maybe like pork rinds and some of the more unique foods that are probably not bought at a lot of local stores, you might be consuming a lot more. But that's number one. You can test your omega-3 levels, and it's cheap and easy. Just red blood spot test. Poke your finger, send it in. But if you are deficient, then yes, let's consume more omega-3s. Omega-3s will instinctively make a change in your body, or instantly make a change in your body, because you're not consuming them. And I always pick on Fish Fry Friday because we don't consume salmon. We consume cod, or sometimes people use like perch, which is very unique. I don't hear a lot of people using perch or walleye. I used to do a lot of perch and walleye, bluegill, but it's not common in the fish fry world. Usually it's like one type of fish and they just send it out to you and you're good to go with coleslaw and rye bread. So you need to consume a lot more fish, whether it's tuna, which of course has a higher mercury content, right? I mean, there's so many problems, and that's number one. If you can consume more fish, inflammation goes down, stress is controlled at a little bit more of a primary level, and without really doing too much either. Any questions so far? So those would be the major things. And last but not least, I don't know your company's take on hemp, but hemp is also something that can be utilized as well because of the phytocannabinoid like activity. Now, the THC content and like drug testing of all these different products, it has to be under a specific amount of THC, and it has to be less than 0.3 by law. And Donald Trump signed the Farm Bill in 2018 that made hemp legal, and our company started growing it immediately. Now, as things start to kind of go through, there's a reason why a lot of this is effective, is because our bodies have an endocannabinoid system. And without fueling that endocannabinoid system, we're really missing one category. So again, if hemp is another option for the company, and I don't know how drug testing works, so I'm speaking very freely here, that could be the tertiary level of stress and inflammation. There's tons of benefits behind it. And of course, like I said, we have a hemp oil as well. But those three are kind of my like gold standards, not even including what we talked about for direct stress, right? Ashwagandha, dronamine, B complex, those are all options. So now I'll kind of open the floor for any kind of like nutrition questions or stress questions or inflammation questions anybody's had, or even just supplements, if anybody has any.
So there's this test for the omega-3s. Are there other, I mean, talk to the doctor about just getting a regular blood panel test to see where you may or may not be deficient. You may look at it kind of sideways as well. Your arm's not falling off.
Right, you're still there.
You want a blood test. So I suppose besides this, for either inflammation or any sort of general deficiencies, what other tests could you have, blood or otherwise? That's common.
Yeah, so it depends. And you're meaning Dr. Chris, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, the
medical team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the medical clinic was.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they would recommend a bunch of things. Could be a general CBC is pretty typical. Obviously, like cholesterol, right? I'm not a doctor, so I'm speaking freely here and off the record. But those are most common in people. Of course, blood pressure, you'll know right away. But common misconceptions that they can't see is necessarily just based on nutrition or nutrition deficiencies. That's where vitamin D tests come into play. That's huge. Another one too, like I said, is omega-3s. And there's even data that shows that omega-3s are very closely linked to cardiovascular disease. So the founder of this test in general has tons of data that supports omega-3 index as it relates to cardiovascular health. So he basically says if you have a deficiency in omega-3s, your risk of cardiovascular death goes up. And that, I guess, kind of makes sense. I mean, I think almost everybody has heard about omega-3s or fish oil, like the benefits of fish oil, but there's so many different types. And again, I can kind of break those down if you want. I mean, I know I gave you like a catalog. Is anybody interested in omega-3 differences?
Yes, because I don't eat fish,
Okay.
but in particular, I'm not a favorite. And if I do, it's, you know, the bad
Oh,
stuff, the cod, you know,
The delicious
Fish
stuff.
Fry Friday.
Yeah.
So I don't eat nearly enough. And then I used to eat a lot of tuna, but then I found out about high
Yeah.
mercury contents.
Right.
And that kind of threw me off because, you know, I'm not a real big fish flavor.
Mm-hmm. And tuna is easily accessible and cheap. 99 cents a can. I used to eat 2 cans a day for years. So if you think you eat a lot of tuna, I mean, I was consuming, like I said, about 2 cans a day, and I'm still here breathing, you know, some days. But the overview of fish oil, without going into like every company in the world, I'll speak on what I know about. And most fish oils in the market, they have interesting marketing claims. They'll still say they have like 1,000 milligrams of fish oil or omega-3s. On the contrary, it's fish body oil. So I don't think it shows you, let's take a look. Yeah, I don't think it shows you it does, nice, okay. So if you open your pamphlet, just as a general precursor, look at the top supplement facts. It says 2 soft gels, fish oil concentrate from tuna, and then total omega-3s. It says total fish oil or fish, right? Let me know if you can't find it. But fish oil concentrate. And a lot of times they use a fish body oil, which is basically almost like just a solution of fish oil that doesn't have a high concentration of omega-3s. But the first thing you notice when you look at the top one, or even any of them, is that you have a huge amount of EPA, DHA. Those are your primary omega-3s. And there's a few of them, but those are ones that we really focused on in terms of omega-3s and fish oil. So when you consume fish oil, we almost always associate that with omega-3s. Omega-3s are kind of the secret sauce. Fish are good for you, but we think about omega-3s as a secret sauce. Most companies will put in fish body oils without a high concentration of omega-3s. And that gets kind of techy, but they don't give you a lot. So when you're consuming 1, 2, 3 soft gels, you're actually only getting a couple thousand milligrams of fish body oil and maybe only about 300 to 500 milligrams of omega-3s. You want a lot more than that. And that's where more concentrated omega-3s come into play. So Prima, which is the flyer I gave you, is a concentrated omega-3. And it gives you a decent amount. I always recommend 2 or 4 pills a day. Now, the old school fish oil that has huge amounts of benefit, cod liver oil. And I would say older generations are used to cod liver. Their parents would make them take it, but it's a high concentration of omega-3s, vitamin A, and vitamin D. It's basically nature's sunlight in a pill. And that's really far-fetched. I mean, I'm not far-fetched, but far gone. We don't do that anymore. Like no one's parents do that. So you have to supplement. And for those who don't supplement with omega-3s, you're in essence having an imbalance of omega-6s. And that's kind of what I like to think about is that tipping scale. Most Americans have a high concentration of omega-6s, but a very low concentration of omega-3s. And there's a reason why when you hear the media or even experts talk about the Mediterranean diet or Asian diets and why they're healthy, fish. And that's why certain areas in Japan have a really long life expectancy. They don't consume a lot of processed grains or nuts, seeds, and oils. They're consuming fish. Fish and rice basically is what I joke, and vegetables.
Seaweed.
Yeah, seaweed's good. It's actually a great form of omega-3s too, and algae. So if anybody's vegan, you can do algae. You just don't carry it. Otherwise, omega-3s from fish are usually very high in concentration, but you have to find a company, and again, slightly biased, and I'm with Standard Process, right? We do have a high quality fish oil, but we're not the only ones. You know, there are a lot of companies out there. So then liquid, last but not least, is calamari oil. If you don't want to swallow a pill, they're kind of an oblong pill, hard to swallow. I actually chew my fish oils. And I choke on the omega-3s. For some reason, I can swallow like 50 pills if they're not oblong capsule shape. Makes no sense. literally dying in my house. So, but I hope I answer some of the questions. At least question about omega-3s is there's a big link to it, a lot of awesome benefits, but also biggest thing is because we consume so many omega-6s, we don't have enough omega-3s. And again, overall scale here, people might ask, why should I take DHA, EPA, or EPA and DHA? I say take both. That gives you the overall scale. It's more of a specified amount. Let's say somebody's going through, I don't want to like mention a disease or ailment, but Alzheimer's, maybe the higher concentration of DHA because the brain functioning will help a lot. Or if you're going through possibly surgery, maybe